All right, what's going on, everybody? This is Boxingwave. I wanted to give like a little preview to the Isak Cruz Lamont Roach pay per view. All right, this is a pretty dope card. It's in December. Like, I really, really like this card. I mean, I know it's a pay per view, and I've been complaining about pay per views. I still gotta do a video on the Zone and what's going on with them, which is crazy. But I'll do a separate video on that. But this card is pretty dope, man. Like, I'm not gonna lie, this is a good pay per view. I mean, I'm tired of pay-per-views, but this is actually a good pay-per-view. Like, you have a full card of good fights. And then even on the preliminary, they just added the Frank Martin against Ramses Barthélemy fight as well. So this is legit good pay-per-view. Like, all the fights I'm cool with. Like, all the fights I want to see. Like, I have no issues with this pay-per-view at all. Okay. So I'm looking forward to the fight. The fight is on December 6th. These two are going to be fighting for a WBC interim title at 140. Okay. And that's going to be the main event. The co-main event, I might even like a little even more. You got Janibek against Lara, which is a unification at 160. I mean, finally we're getting a unification at 160. And even though Lara is in his 40s now, he's 42. Janibek, I'm still waiting to see him fight someone with a pulse. He's already unified, but Lara holds a title. I'm just I'm excited to see that fight. I mean, that's my favorite fight on the card. Okay. And then you also got a Stephen Fulton against a Shocky Fulton, which is another good fight. These three fights so far are main events on its own. You know what I mean? It's just these are good fights. Uh I just this is another fight that was on the undercard originally for Keith Thurman and Sebastian Fundora, but that fight got canceled because Fundora actually has an injury. So they threw these two on this card, and they made this card, which was already going down, a lot more valuable. All right. And then now we're getting one pay-per-view instead of two because we were gonna get this card in some capacity, Isak Cruz, Lamont Roach, and it was also going to get the Fundora Keith Thurman. That would have been too much, you know what I mean, especially for pay per views. And then lastly, we're getting Jesus Ramos against Shane Mosley Jr., which is a solid fight to be on the undercard, you know. It's a solid fight. You know, Jesus Ramos, I've always been praising him on this channel. Good fighter at 154. Also, you know, only lost to Erison Lubin, who's fighting today. His only loss, and that's a very, very controversial loss. A lot of people think Jesus Ramos won that fight. And then Shane Mosley Jr., who I think has looked better in recent years. No, he has not fought in an elite current fighter. You know, I know he's beaten Danny Jacobs. You know, he's beaten Gabe Rosado, guys that's a little past it, but I still think that he looks better like right now. You know, I think he's probably at the best he's ever gonna really be. All right. So and then you got Frank Martin come in fighting Ramses Barthélemy. Barthélemy, I feel like it's that Barthélemy is been a gatekeeper throughout his whole career. You know, I just think that he's always been the guy that I don't know if he was actually like an actual champion. Maybe he was at some point, but he's fighting Frank Martin. I've been talking about Frank Martin for a minute. Like, yo, where is he at? Like, I know he lost a Tank, but it's been a year and a half now since he's lost a Tank. That fight was in June 2024. All right, but let's go down. Like, all right, I'm just gonna give a preview. I'm not giving no breakdowns or nothing like that. I'm gonna do breakdowns for separate fights and all that. Isak Cruz against Lamont Roach. Now, look, they needed to do something with this fight. These two are the fighters that gave Tank the best work. All right. Tank, you know, had a lot of issues against Isak Cruz. Cruz was a guy that he was a replacement for Rolly Romero, who Tank was originally going to fight, but he eventually did fight later. And Isak Cruz gave him a tough fight. I know Tank had like a hand injury in the fight, but Cruz and his style and his really, really aggressive approach was a problem for Tank. All right. Cruz being shorter than the Tank, probably only fighter we're gonna see Tank fight that's shorter than him. You know, coming in, ducking low, swinging those big, big power shots, was a problem for Tank. And then we saw the Lamont Roach fight earlier this year. I think Lamont Roach edged the fight out even without the knockdown. I thought he won 7 rounds of 5. but I thought it was close, And my whole thing with this fight is, I think at this point, especially because Tank ruined the Jake Paul rematch, the winner of these two is most likely going to get a rematch with Tank, you know? And I think right now, Cruz has been having a solid career. He's a name, he's somewhat of a name solely off his performance against Tank, and so is Lamont Roach. But I think Lamont Roach, because his fight was so recent with Tank, it's like, yo, you gotta do something with your buzz because you didn't get the Tank rematch, right? And you've been going on a press run all year, right? You did a million interviews on every boxing and just media platform. You did an interview talking about this dude. You was on social media heavy, which you should do. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you got to keep your buzz going. So I think this is a proper fight for it. Now, I do not believe that either one of these guys are true 140s. I think with Cruz, he went up there with like a lot of other guys that went up recently from 140 in the PBC to fight for the WBA titles. And that includes Rolly, that includes Isaac Cruz, that includes Jose Valenzuela. There's a bunch of guys that recently fought for that title, which I believe is a PBC title at 140. You know what I'm saying? I don't think a lot of those guys were really truly, but he's been fighting, he's been staying up there since he's gone up and fought up there, but he's not fighting the other top fighters that's been at 140, and I'm talking about Cruz right now. And now Lamont Roach, who was champion at 130, moved up to 135, got pulled up to fight Tank, and now he's getting Cruz at 140. With that being said, this is for our interim title, not the WBA, but the WBC. I don't think size is a factor because I think at the end of the day, they both probably belong at 135 anyway. You know what I mean? But I think the matchup is a great matchup because what Roach and what we've seen him do against Tank recently, like those two really was like in the pocket with Tank, taking his power and all that. I think this is gonna end up being more of a slugfest than anything because Roach showed his durability in a fight with Tank. He showed that he can be durable. And Cruz, we already know is a huge puncher, but he's going to struggle a little bit with boxers, and he struggled a little bit in some of his most recent fights against other sluggers. When he can't, it's been a little bit harder for him to get the knockouts lately. I mean, he knocked out Rolly, but recently it's been a little bit, he had that Fierro fight, he had a couple of those fights where, he won those fights, but going up at 140, like he's a really small dude, you know what I mean? So uh I don't know how long this knockout, but I'm leaning for I'm gonna do a breakdown, but I'm leaning towards Roach right now. Based on his performance against Tank, I think he can stay it and trade a little bit with him, but he's a lot more defensively responsible and stuff, a better counter puncher. They're both extremely durable. Roach's loss against Jamel Herring was years ago at this point. Like, I know people still bring that up, but I think he did better against Tank than did against Jamel Herring. I remember watching that fight the night of the fight live against Herring. He did better against Tank, in my opinion. You know what I mean? And he's had some better fights in between. He had a lot of fights in between that. And Isaac Cruz, even though uh he lost to Rayo, he had a lot of fights since he lost to Tank too. So I think at the end of the day that the winner of this fight needs to get that rematch with Tank. And I think, Roach got a lot of pressure on him because right now you don't want to fumble the hype you got from that Tank fight. You know what I mean? Everybody knows you now. Don't fumble. Like this is a lot of pressures on you now because even though you're not fighting for a title or anything like that, you fighting for the buzz you created for yourself by performing well against Tank. And one thing you don't want to lose right now is this fight right here because everybody got high expectations of you because of that performance. All right, so it was a big fight for him. Big fight for both. All right. Lara, Janibek. Again, Lara, his resume is crazy. I mean, he's been in there with everybody. Canelo. I mean, he's been in there with a lot of people. Like, we could go down a list. But as a guy that's 42 years old, he's changed his style up. Last generation, Lara was one of my favorite fighters. All right. When I started this channel, Lara was already one of my favorite fighters. I made content on him. I wanted him against Floyd was my dream fight at one point. Out of everybody that Floyd could have faced, I wanted to see him fight Lara. Lara did get the Canelo fight, which was one of my dream fights, too, at the time. But it's been a long up and down road with Lara. Paul Williams fight, which was the first fight I seen of him. Or one of the first. I can't remember if that was the first, but I remember he was fighting on ESPN at the time. So was Demetrius Andrade. I used to watch them fight on like Friday night fights and stuff like that. And I remember watching Lara. It's been a long road. Austin Trout. And it's been a minute since he's been in there with real comp. Like, I know he stopped Danny Garcia recently, but Danny Garcia was never really proven as a 54 or 160 pounder. You know what I mean? Even at 47, he lost to the best at 47. He never beat any of the best at 47. His prime years was at 140. And Lara beat him recently, but Lara's just been like knocking guys out. He doesn't do the movement like he used to do back in the day. Like, whatever you saw against Angulo and Canelo, we don't see that no more. I mean, even when he lost to Jarrett Hurd, he had already started keeping his foot planted and really sitting down his punches. Lara, to me, outside of Manny Pacquiao, has one of the best straight left hands in all boxing. And even with age, he's still shown that. And even though he's getting older, he still is defensively sharp, simple. All right. Not many, he doesn't have all the angles. He doesn't have much of an inside game. But what he does, he's perfected his style. And even at the older age, I think still at the older age, this is still Janibek's toughest fight. Even right now, Janibek has a few guys I'm familiar with that I know of, but the most boxing fans are not familiar with them. And even though he's unified at 160 right now, all right, Carlos Dandam is the only other fighter out there that is not unified yet. But I think Crawford is coming back to fight him. I think that's going to be a fight. But anyway, Janibek is a good fighter, and at one point he was being promoted as the second coming of Triple G. Like Kazakh fighter. He's supposed to come out, succeed him. He's had some good fights. He got signed with Top Rank, but he just don't have the fights. And to be honest, as good as he's been looking, it's just like the opposition is just not that good. I remember him struggling against Denzel Bentley, who he was a huge favorite against. There's just not enough out there for him. And Lara is leagues above, even at this age, still leagues above all those guys. So I actually think this is a 50-50 fight, only because I don't know what Janibek is really capable of. When I do a breakdown, I will do at some point. What I will say off top is, if the pace of the fight is very slow, I'm leaning towards Lara. If the fight is a lot more like Janibek is being very aggressive, even though he might get clipped and hit with a few good shots, the more output for him, the more combinations, the more he makes it into a battle. I like his chances to beat Lara. Like Brian Castano, even though that was a draw with Lara, I like that approach. I think if If they're just playing chess and it's a rangy fight, I'm leading with Lara. Because Lara is just, you're just not gonna beat him in a slow paced fight. You just not. I just don't think anybody can really beat him in that kind of fight. You gotta take the fight over. Even Hurd, when he was losing the first half of that fight, he eventually started to pressure Lara and turn it into a slugfest. You got to do that with Lara. So when you go to, Canelo being aggressive, when you go to Castano being Vanes Roach and back in the day, those are the guys that gave Lara issues. You cannot fight at Lara's pace. Don't give him time to, what he do. That's a good fight. Best fight in the card, in my opinion. At least the one I'm looking forward to the most. I think Cruz and Roach is going to be the best action fight. Stephen Fulton and against Shaki Foster is a great fight too. The thing I noticed about those two, they're both a Black American fighters, and they both have slickness in their styles, but they also can turn fights into a dogfight, right? They both have shown that in their careers. They both don't have any fights against any other Black American fighters that's top tier or have that slickness to them. I noticed that. Both of them fight a lot of Latino fighters, a lot of Mexican fighters. They don't really have anyone there. I think on Sharky Foster with him, I think Conceição is probably the closest to that style, right? Even though he's from Brazil, he kind of brings that same type of style a little bit. And I think with Fulton, I think the only time he fought another fighter that has slickness to him is Inoue. Inoue fought that style against him in their fight. That's the only time I seen him fight a guy that was smoother than him, which is weird because Inoue is a battle fighter, you know what I mean? But in that fight, he's from Japan. That was like the style he fought. His hands was down, he's rolling punches, boom, countering. He was quick, he was slicker than Fulton in that fight. But Fulton in other fights against Roman and other guys, he fought that kind of fight. But against, other certain fights, he fought a dog fight. You know what I mean? So he can do both. And so could a Shockey Foster. This is almost like a mirror match. I know Foster is good at switching. Foster had fights where he might have been down some, but he's turned it around. I know he did against Rocky. I know he did against Nova. He had struggled a little bit earlier, and then he made some kind of adjustments. Fulton, Figueroa fights, Leo fights. There's fights where, he had to fight an uncomfortable fight, but he found a way to win. Can't wait to do that breakdown. Very even fight. Fulton's moving up to 130. He's claiming he's staying at 130. He didn't even really stay at 126 that long. You know what I mean? But it is what it is. Good fight. I'm glad that they didn't scrap it after the Fedora stuff didn't go down. Good fight. I can't wait to cover that fight and do a breakdown on the fight. And then last but not least, Ramos against Mosley Jr. I'm just leaning towards Ramos. I know Mosley has had a couple good wins against some of the older guys, like I said earlier. But Ramos, I praise, pretty good southpaw Mexican fighter, good boxing skills, good volume. Again, the fight with Lubin that he lost, it was very, very, I thought it was a draw. I don't think either one of them really, really, really clearly won that fight. But Ramos is a big guy, 160 now. This fight, I believe, is at 160. So he won't really necessarily be big against Shane Mosley Jr., but at 154, he was pretty big. But I like his skills. I like his style. He seems to be able to be a well-rounded fighter. I'm leaning towards him. I'm leaning a little bit towards him in this fight. But good fight. It should be a good fight. And then Frank Martin as well against Barthélemy. I'm just glad to see Frank Martin back. Barthélemy has always been a guy, though, has always give everybody problems. But he's given us also some stinkers, too. You know what I mean? So I like that Frank Martin is going to be at 140 now. I'm glad he's just coming back. Like I said, Barthélemy has always been problematic towards people, but I like Frank to win this fight. I'm edging him to win a decision win. But I think Barthélemy is a guy long arm, switches. can can fight an outside. You know, he's Cuban. I don't think he has like the Cuban style like a Lara or a Rigondeaux had, but you know, he's a guy that can fight a rangy, tall, rangy fight, or he's a guy that can go to war with you and exchange with you. You know, he can do both. So that should be a good. That's a pretty decent scrap. Um, and I'm just glad to see Frank Martin get back in the ring. But listen, I'm gonna do breakdowns for these fights soon. We got a good schedule coming up, you know. And I'm looking forward to giving you guys breakdown on the breakdown. We're gonna knock all of these out starting this week. You know, if you haven't already, check out my Virgil Ortiz Jr. Breakdown. The fight is later on this evening. I already told you guys I'm putting money on Everson Lubin. He's a plus 600, so I gotta go with him on the money thing. I think Virgil Ortiz is still should be a slight favorite to win, but I like Lubin's chances heavy, so that's why I'm putting money towards him. I think he shouldn't be a favorite like that. I think this is a 50-50 or close to being a 50-50 fight. Anyway, I'm out of here, man. Subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys soon. Peace.